Life and ministry transitions can be confusing and complicated to navigate. Welcome to Navigate, everyone. I'm Tim Austin, and this is the podcast designed to take the guesswork out of transition. Whether you have a transition looming in your future or you're trying to make sense out of a past or current transition, this show's for you. In each episode, we'll introduce strategies and tools individuals and teams can use to effectively navigate seasons of change. At Navigate, it's all about leveraging the challenges of change for optimal growth. I'm super excited to have Jon Taylor today on the show. Jon is the Executive Director of Coaching Mission International. It's an organization that provides coaching and coach training to mission leaders to equip them to more effectively disciple the nations and fulfill their calling. Prior to this role, Jon served 24 years in local church leadership, most recently for 17 years at First Christian Church in Phoenix, Arizona. Jon earned a dual degree in business management and biblical studies from Pacific Christian College in Fullerton, California. And he and his wife, June, have been married since 1986, and they have 2 grown sons. In this conversation, we'll be talking about some of the challenges related to identity and life purpose in transition seasons that we go through. So let's go ahead and dive into our discussion with Jon Taylor. Welcome, Jon.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's so great to have you on. And as I was reading your bio, and as we actually have talked and have shared in some conversations together, you have 2 grown sons. So does that mean you're empty nesters?
We are empty nesters. Been enjoying that for a couple of years now.
All right. I'm wondering how that feels. We have maybe 2 years until our youngest daughter will most likely go off to college. So I may be coming to you for some wisdom and maybe some transitions coaching. Who knows?
Yeah, to the point of your podcast here, it was a great transition to move to empty nesters.
Yeah, well, that was good. So it was a positive experience for the most part.
Very much so, yes.
Okay, that's good. Good to hear. That gives me hope. Yeah, so I want to start by just saying how grateful I am for the vision and mission of Coaching Mission International, which we will be referring to as CMI. I began my training as a life and leadership coach with CMI back in 2012. And I think, Jon, you were in a cohort that was before me, a couple years before me, correct?
Yeah, I was in the initial CMI cohort of 2009.
Wow. Okay. So you were one of the pioneers.
In on the ground floor.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Well, I know for me, it was exactly what I needed to help bridge my passion for missions with my role of coming alongside global workers. And, but rather than me trying to explain what CMI does and why it exists, I'll leave that to you. Tell us why CMI exists.
Yeah, happy to do that. You know, one of the reasons whether we exist is to multiply coaching for missions. And we do that by providing coaching and coach training to missions leaders, to national leaders around the world. And we found that that's a real need because a lot of missions leaders and cross-cultural workers are going at it alone. And many of them have a few trusted, wise, helpful people that can support them, encourage them, and provide, what they need in the way of time and resources to get over things. So while there are more and more member care services that are available, a lot of missions workers just don't have somebody that's trained, skilled, in the way of mentor or coach that can just come alongside them and walk with them. And so that's why CMI exists, is to do that, to come alongside missions workers, national leaders, and to just walk with them and help them become more effective in the work that they are already doing.
Great. And I've heard it said within CMI and some of the vocabulary that we use. It's I think if I'm getting it right, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Multiplying coaching on the mission field, is that kind of a slogan, or am I getting that right?
Right. Yeah. Multiply coaching for missions. There's a lot of different areas or places where people can receive coaching, coach training, but that is our niche audience. And that's the area that we focus on is with missionaries and again, with key national leaders in some of those same countries.
Wonderful. That's awesome. Okay. So someone might, reading your bio might ask, so are you a coach? Are you a pastor? Or are you a missionary? Tell us a bit more about what you do within CMI and how you navigated what would seem like multiple roles or transition to multiple roles throughout the years.
Yeah. Of those things, coach, pastor, missionary, I'm not a missionary. I work with a missions organization, but definitely a coach, a trainer. I used to be on staff at a church, as you said earlier on, as a pastor, local church ministry for over 24 years. Most recently, over 17 years here at a church in Phoenix. But I've also, I'm currently a volunteer chaplain with Phoenix PD. I'm trained and have been working with Cerny Smith stress assessment as a consultant or a coach with them as well. And so I have had a lot of different multiple roles going on at the same time. And so, to your question of navigating those things, it's really been a matter of deciding, what's primary, what do I have time for, what are my margins. I have actually stepped out of one or two of those roles, especially as I transitioned here into the role with CMI. And so it's just been a bit of learning, what are my limits, what can I handle, and what do I really need to be giving my time to.
Yeah. So 17 years in local church ministry, and I'm assuming that was as a pastor on staff?
Yeah, that was just here in Phoenix, even 7 more years at other churches before arriving here.
Okay. So how did that, during that long season of local church ministry, how did that impact or influence you in the direction you have moved toward coaching and working with an organization like CMI?
I think that really came about as I was seeking a better way to help people. That's one of my core values, and really the impact that I want to have in life is helping people grow and help them mature and take steps, whether it's in their faith or just growing as an individual. And I found myself becoming a bit frustrated, if you will, of trying to counsel people, tell them what to do, and they wouldn't do that for some reason. They had a hard time following my instructions and what I was recommending for them to do. So I'd heard about this idea of coaching and began to investigate it myself. And then we had a guest speaker come for a weekend of workshops and speaking in main sessions and or main services. And he talked about coaching. So I asked him to tell me more about that, which he did. He said, here's the book that you need to read, which was Tony Stoltzfus's leadership coaching book. And I began reading through that. And I said, yes, this is what I want to know more about. And asked this guy that had been speaking, I asked him where he got trained. And he said, through Tony's school, but that didn't exist anymore. But I ought to write Tony and ask him what he would recommend. So I did. And Tony said, hey, there's this new organization that's just starting. I'm going to be doing the training for them. And why don't you check it out, see if that might be something that works. And so that was Coaching Mission International. And I applied with them and was a part of that very first cohort, as I mentioned earlier. And that was the beginning of my coaching journey.
Great. Yeah, it's great to hear some more about your journey. And I'm wondering, just for those in church ministry, local church leaders, pastors, staff members, just and I know CMI is the focus, the vision, the mission is on coming alongside global workers for missions, and yet how can, because of all of your experience in church leadership, how can this kind of training benefit local church leaders, whether it's within their own structure and their own teams, and and or outside of that in terms of their mission, their global mission, their mission to fulfill the Great Commission.
Yeah. I think it can be hugely helpful. It certainly was for me. That's been my experience in that. And I say this often, and I say this introductory part as well. I don't overstate it when I say that coaching really did change my life in terms of how I interact with people, the level of conversations, just even, conversations in passing, but it certainly impacted my leadership at the local church. It impacted relationships, family relationships, as well as friendships. It's just had a huge impact in that it has made me, one, a better listener to people, but also it's really helped me ask better questions. And that's really at the heart of coaching, both of those skills.
Yeah.
The good, strong listening skills, as well as good question asking skills. And quite honestly, I'd been lacking in those, thought I was pretty good in each of those areas. But as I began training, it's like, I'm not really as good as I think that I am in these areas. So as I began to grow in those skills, it really did impact my leadership at the local church level and all of those other areas.
Yeah, I think it's hard for someone with no, with no background or history in coaching to see how this can be all pervasive in terms of its influence, exposure to coaching, even foundational, getting trained in just some foundational coaching skills, how it can impact so many spheres of our lives, whether that's in the workplace, in those conversations, leading teams, working with a team, family relationships, conversations with our spouses and our kids, and just all of those areas. So I love the way you put that, because it's been my experience as well, being how it's influenced so many areas of my life in a positive way.
Yeah, and again, to get back to your question about at the local church level, it helped my leadership in general, but specifically how I was leading the team as a whole, how I was having conversations with team members one-on-one, how I was handling conflict. And we all know that exists even at the local church level among staff members, how I was navigating those conversations. I think it's just hugely helpful, as I said, especially for, all pastors, but especially missions pastors, as they work with those workers overseas and national leaders. I just think these skills are critical, and I would really strongly encourage people to gain some even basic coaching skills just to help them in all areas of their life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, getting to our topic today around transition, identity, and purpose, specifically how we often deal with identity and purpose issues when we're going through complicated transitions. When I was transitioning back to the States following 20 years of cross-cultural living, I struggled a lot in the area of identity and purpose. And, we know as followers of Christ, our identity is more than just what we do. Ultimately, it comes from knowing who we are in Him. But through that prolonged transition I was going through, I discovered that I had really, in many ways, based my identity around roles and reputation and other people's perceptions. So I had to come to a place of allowing those misconceptions to fall away, to be stripped away, and to recover a healthy sense of identity and purpose moving forward in the new season that I was going into. So, Jon, can you say a bit about your transition story, and in particular, how this area of identity has been highlighted for you in transition seasons?
Sure. I do think that they are very closely tied together, this idea of transitions and our identity in the midst of those. And when I reflect on that idea, I can pretty well pretty easily point to three major transitions in my life that I think back on and think, wow, my identity was tied to this or this as I was going through those times of transition. And ultimately, at least with the first several of these transitions, in a pretty unhealthy way because of how I'd had my identity wrapped up. The first area of transition was going to college in California. I grew up in the Midwest in a small town and went to a small Christian college there in the area where I grew up for a couple of years. And then I decided to transfer. I wanted a business degree. And so I transferred out to a college in California. And that was my first real transition time dealing with this identity because everybody knew who my family was where I grew up in the Midwest. And the first part of my life up to that point was built around, pleasing parents, pleasing grandparents, and making sure that I stayed out of trouble because I didn't want to bring dishonor onto the family in that way. But when I went out to California, nobody knew them. And I found myself even responding in conversations when somebody would ask me a question, why I believed a certain way or why I did a certain thing. And I would begin to respond with, well, because my family, wait, you don't know my family. What is my identity? Who am I? What do I believe? And so that was really the first time that I began to think about this idea of what is my identity as I'm in this time of transition, and what do I have as an identity, and how do I deal with that? Do I make up a completely new identity, or do I just kind of shift my identity? What do I do with this? And that's really the first time that I thought about that idea of identity. In that season.
Could we pause right there? Because that just brought me to thinking about pastors' kids, missionary kids. And for us, it's been a lot of looking at missionary families and how our kids transition. And I'm wondering, why is it that, or is it even true? Maybe it's an assumption on my part, but it seems like a real season of struggle with identity. Can you comment on that? Because it seems like your own experience, you had some of that in your own experience.
Yeah, I definitely have. And I've even seen it in the lives of other people as their kids maybe transition home. The family's been on the field, the children's entire lives, and they come back to the States for college. And they do have that kind of crisis of identity of who am I? And, I've been told these things, we've done these things on the field, but I think on the field, especially, and in pastors' families, that the identity is wrapped up so much in the role of the parents. And so that the children just kind of take that on themselves as this is who we are together. But then when they do strike out on their own, then it's, I know the family's identity, but what is my identity?
Right.
And I think that's why it is such a struggle.
Yeah. We've seen that time and time again, and kids wrestling with it, and some coming out on the other side with a healthy, eventually with a healthy sense of purpose and identity, and can move forward, and some just kind of have these prolonged times of just really, really struggling with that. So, sorry, I kind of interrupted you there, but that was your first kind of big transition going off to college. Okay, I'll let you go on with the other ones.
Okay. Well, I'd say the next one was probably when I was going into full-time ministry. I had grown up in a family of pastors and missionaries, and again, that had been a large part of the identity, but I had not ever been in that kind of a role. And so after working in some different types of jobs and some different areas, I thought, well, maybe ministry is what I'm supposed to be doing. So I did find a position at a local church, and I stepped into that. And then it became that identity crisis of what does it mean to be in this role? And, now that I've got this label on me of pastor or minister, what does that mean? And how is my identity wrapped up in that? And the struggle, of I'm supposed to be, this person that knows at least a certain level about these different areas, and yet, internally feeling, wow, I really don't even know what I'm doing, or don't feel like I know very well what I'm doing. So how do you, I think that's a problem for people, especially if they're younger, when they're going into a key ministry position, is you begin to develop this idea of, at least I have to present myself to people this way, and then we can begin to wear those masks, and that those masks can become our identity as we are talking to other people. And I think that that's a real point of caution that we need to talk more about as people are being launched into different ministry areas.
Yeah, for sure. So here we have kind of key junctures in your history of first big, college transition that season, then moving into career and ministry, and that big transition, and some of the identity struggles around that. And I like what you say about the masks, because that is a time when we tend to wear those masks, or to step into those and start seeing ourselves, defining ourselves around certain roles and things we do. And then what comes next? What came next for you?
Well, for me, major transition wise, it was when I then moved into a position of lead pastor at the local church. And I really felt in an uncomfortable spot at that time, because I never wanted to be a lead or a senior pastor at a local church. And yet, due to some transition that happened at the church, I had asked our eldership if we could do a team leadership model. They said, sure. And that means that you're going to be the lead pastor. Now, we had another guy on staff. He was the main communicator, so I wasn't preaching every weekend, but I had that label, that tag placed on me. And I really felt uncomfortable with that, and even did some pushback against God at that time, saying, you got the wrong guy here, God. I know that you're God and you're all knowing, and but I think you might have been a little bit off in this way as I was moving into that position. And that was a real time of struggling with identity in that season of life, and something that really I really had to work through. But that's when I discovered coaching and began the coaching training process. And that's when we moved into the life purpose discovery area of the coach training. And that was just so impactful for me as I began to wrestle with some of the ideas in life purpose discovery that helped me through that season.
So that was a real turning point for you in terms of you getting some tools and some skills and resources to actually process a transition.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, there were several parts of the life purpose discovery training module that really were key for me in providing those resources and that understanding. And the most important of which was this idea of allegiance. And, whose am I is the question that we ask in our training module there. The other parts are, design, how am I made, passion, what has God placed in me, I'm passionate about, how has he prepared me, other areas. But this one of allegiance, whose am I, really kind of hit me upside the head. And it's a question that you might think, well, of course, we know whose we are, and we're in Christ. And you even mentioned that earlier, talking about your own transition back to the States. But yet it's a key question to ask ourselves in some really important areas. And can I say that I have fully surrendered this area of my identity to Christ? Or am I still holding on to some things there?
Yeah. For me too, I would say that particular module, life purpose discovery, was super impactful. And I think for me, the area around what am I passionate about, clarifying values, core values. Wow, that just had a huge impact on me being able to process a really prolonged transition time. And when we're going through a transition and we have time to process like that, that is a gift. The time, I know that a lot of times, when we are in experience a forced transition or a rug pulled out transition, we might call it. We don't always have that gift of time. And there are ways to process those kinds of transitions as well. But when we do have the time, that is a gift from God to be able to really begin to become crystal clear on who we are and what our life calling, our mission is moving forward. So yeah, just to say, I think I really agree with you. That was a powerful thing. So we're talking about, going through these transition seasons, and you brought up a book, the name of a book earlier by Tony Stoltzfus, called Leadership Coaching. And another one around this area of transition that can be really helpful is also another book by Tony Stoltzfus called The Calling Journey. Mm-hmm. And what I hear when I hear you talking about your transition journey in these three main areas of your life, it brought me to that book. And what Tony talks about is these stages and valleys of transitions, and how we go through these valleys, and some of them are valleys around identity and purpose, and then we kind of come out of there and we come through another season of maybe productivity or purpose, and then we come into another valley. And so it's interesting that, the way, since I've read that book and kind of returned to that book and some of the themes around that, I always, when I hear someone's transition story, I often think in terms of stages and valleys. I don't know about you, but
yeah, I sure do, because it speaks directly to that idea of identity in transition seasons, and especially that is the last valley that is talked about in that book, is the valley of identity. Mm-hmm. And I know as I moved into that lead pastor position, for me, that's exactly where I was. Had just entered into that valley of identity, and that's what my real time of wrestling was with who am I, how am I supposed to lead when I'm have these other swirling questions in my mind in this season of transition.
Yes. So now, okay, so you and I are both kind of middle age. Let's just put it that way, right? Okay. So let's
thank you for that generous description.
Let's talk about a little bit about that season, because that is pretty relevant. I know it's relevant for me, and maybe some people we've worked with, we've coached, we've come alongside in these kind of midlife seasons. Why do you think it's especially highlighted, this transition period, and can be such a difficult area to navigate especially for ministry leaders and global leaders, global workers, this kind of midlife area?
Yeah, I think it's directly tied to that. It's what, at least for years, has been called the midlife crisis, even in some contexts. And I think that that's true, but I think that it all comes back to this idea of identity, especially for people 40s, 50s. You've been doing a certain work maybe for a while or a long time, and you come to this point around that age time frame when you're just questioning, okay, what have I been doing? What is the impact that I've been having?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What does God have left for me? And how is that related to my identity? Because, we tie our identities to a role, to a season, a job that we've had, through a ministry, even as you're talking about, ministry leaders and global workers, it can be very much tied to what we have been doing. And
Yes.
It's all wrapped up and tied to that idea of, I do this, I do this, I do this. But that's not necessarily what our identity is. And I think, again, in our 40s and 50s, we come to that point of, wait a minute here. I have been doing this, yes, but do I want that to be my identity, to be my legacy, if you will, of who I am?
Right. Yeah. As we wrap this time up together, I want to look at just steps forward. So someone may be listening to our podcast today and and saying, this is true of me. I'm going through transition. I'm wrestling with identity and life purpose issues, and I need some support along the way. Having lived in Central Asia for 16 years, I understand that many global workers can feel isolated and under-resourced when it comes to getting the support they need while navigating really hard seasons of transition. How can their sending churches, their sending organizations partner with CMI to help resource these people?
Yeah, that's something that we can definitely do, because that's what we are all about, is coming alongside people again to help them be more effective in not just the work that they are doing, but also in the idea of them fulfilling their calling that God has placed in front of them. So what we can do is partner with churches and organizations and provide coaching to those that need it. And again, we're not just talking, somebody in a crisis mode by any means. It can be just somebody in a season of transition, getting ready to go to the field, getting ready to come back from the field, a time home on home leave, sabbatic, whatever it is, we can provide coaching to meet somebody at any of those stages. And it can just be so helpful to have somebody come alongside you and walk with you through that season. But we can also partner by providing training to those organizations, to the missions pastors, maybe at a sending church, members of the missions team, those kind of people, to help them be ready to provide this coaching to the people that they are working with and that they have sent out. They're supporting them financially. They're encouraging them in other ways. The coaching perspective can just really be a great tool to add to their toolbox to help support and encourage the workers that they are already working with. Great.
So I'm hoping those who are listening today who might be in that situation, might be in a place like that, will be able to find ways to move forward. And I believe and am convinced that CMI is a great organization to partner with. Jon, you're leading well, and I'm just so grateful to have you as a friend and a partner in ministry and a fellow coach. So I just want to say, thank you so much, Jon, for joining me today. And to learn more about Jon and Coaching Mission International, you can go to coachingmission.com. And anything else, Jon, that will help people find help, find resources they need through CMI, other than going onto the website?
That's the best place to do that. And we are, at some different gatherings and conferences or whatever, but that's really the spot to go to find all that information. And again, I just want to underscore, that a coach can really help somebody with the issues of perspective, help them reframe some things, especially during seasons of transition. And we can just be a lot of help to people whatever stage they are in. So I appreciate that.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Jon, for joining me.
Thanks, Tim. Good to be with you today.
As I come alongside fellow transitioners, I'm passionate about helping them stay true to who they are and what they want to become, both through and on the other side of transition. You can move confidently forward with greater clarity of purpose as you navigate transition, both for yourself and for your team. Book a discovery call with me at EncompassLifeCoaching.com if you're interested to learn how life coaching can help you grow during this time of transition. Thanks for joining us today for this episode of Navigate Podcast. I've been your host, Tim Austin. If this has been helpful to you, would you mind rating the podcast, writing a review, and sharing on social media? And of course, you can always subscribe so that you're sure to get in on the next episode. Until the next time.